I'm pleased to say that Van Connor joins me now, though, film critic, host of the Off-Screen podcast. Stayed up all night to watch the Oscars. Wasn't expecting that, though, Van, I wouldn't have thought.
No. I will say, though, if you put aside Will Smith to an extent and look at the night as a whole, there is something incredible to say about the film industry. An awards ceremony that's been sort of geared to patronisingly cater towards an audience that wants to be more populist and had less to do with it is ultimately derailed by the last of our genuine movie stars being problematically old school in public. Like, that seems like the great statement of our time right there, doesn't it?
Well, you mean like they've gone a bit... The whole point is to try and attract different audiences, to try and be a bit more... I don't want to use the word... be a bit more progressive, maybe, in some ways, and then that happens.
Of course, because it's only been... you can count on one hand the number of years it's been since the hashtag #OscarsSoWhite campaign, which was heavily spearheaded by Will Smith's wife. So this is all really an unfortunate confluence of timing and events and reactions and incidents, and it's a mess, really.
I mean, we will talk about some winners, because I think it's really unfair to everybody that's won this, the pinnacle of their careers, and it's literally been overshadowed. But just tell us what it was like watching it unfold live.
We were sort of gearing up for the best documentary category. This all happened with Chris Rock doing his monologue as he then went to announce the nominees for best documentary. And the heavy favourite there, I think, to an extent, was Summer of Soul, which is the Harlem Music Festival documentary by Questlove. And this was going to be a great moment because it had its presence on streaming. It was quite acclaimed. It was going to be quite a prominent moment for that region of specific black music culture. Like, it was going to be quite profound. And that's why having, for instance, Sean Combs be the guy to come out and declare the winner afterwards was, again, meant to have its poignance. It was meant to have its legitimacy within black cultural history. And it got derailed by, of all things, Will Smith slapping Chris Rock. And in the moment itself, we didn't know what was happening. Chris Rock, as you can hear in the clip, just carries on until the last second and says, "Oh, okay, what's going on?" And then whoosh, and just doesn't know what to do. I think he composes himself fairly well and tries to carry it on, but he doesn't stop the show necessarily. He kind of picks it up and runs with it.
I mean, what about that apology afterwards? So everyone's like, no one can believe it, right? Mouths must have been open, jaws must have been dropped. We didn't know. And then he wins Best Actor and gets back on stage. And then he gives that... He obviously did look upset, didn't he, Will Smith, in that acceptance speech?
He looked like he had been humbled. And by the story he tells in his own speech, Denzel, of all people, had comforted him and had said, it's when you're at your highest that the devil comes calling, I think is the quote. And I think because even Denzel knew in the room, and Bradley Cooper, for instance, who you can also see comforting him sort of beside the stage, you get the impression, like there in the room, that it was sort of known that award was going to go to Will Smith. And the great tragedy of the moment is, had he blown this in the room there and then in a moment, in a momentary lapse, because it was a two-horse race going in. It was between him and Cumberbatch. And someone like Denzel taking that time, that's a big move right there.
I mean, this is a line, though, and some people say, no, it must have been fake. And I don't know why it would be fake, because it doesn't benefit anybody, does it really? No. It doesn't look good. But it's quite extraordinary you can see red, but he climbed onto a stage in front of millions of viewers and did that. That is a line, isn't it? Slapping someone in public like that.
It is, and in this country, of all things, we should be aware of this, because Jarvis Cocker famously did something similar to Michael Jackson at the Brits in about 95, 96 or something, when he was singing Earth Song famously at the Brits. The argument now is, has he committed an act of assault? And has he done it, in broad daylight? Has he done it before the world's cameras on the greatest stage in existence? Have we let him get away with this? Is the question. And also, he was then allowed to just sit down and continue watching the show. And people have real issue with that. On the flip side of that as well, there is also the case being made as well that if Will Smith had done nothing, would Chris Rock's in poor taste joke have been dissected on Twitter immediately afterwards anyway? Has Will Smith arguably spared Chris Rock cancellation by taking the bullet himself without realising?
Well, yeah, that's the thing, isn't it? He's made it worse, and it did overshadow his win, his Best Actor win as well. But this idea of, I know I've been reading this morning in the press from America saying that Chris Rock wouldn't press charges. But, I mean, in this country, the CPS can decide to anyway. I'm not quite sure what the rules are over there in the States. But, I mean, it is quite extraordinary. And I think, do you think it will change the way now that these ceremonies are hosted? Because maybe that kind of edgy, on the edge, tasteless jokes will be a thing of the past.
I don't know. The thing that struck me was there's a comedian, Jim Jeffries, you might know. He was based in the UK for a long time, but he's now prominently American-based. And he immediately on Twitter responded to this with a diatribe about how these award shows do treat comedians hosting these shows as basically staff. And that it's unfair, that there's no real recognition given to their talents. And in light of the way that Chris Rock is treated, which he in turn viewed as, this guy is doing his job, if you don't like the joke, that is on you, sort of a stance, which from a comedian is fair game, that in response to things like that, other comedians should, for instance, stand up and boycott award shows like the Oscars. It's
really interesting. I mean, we're going to get the fallout, aren't we? And it will stay with Will Smith, won't it, forever? This now,
it absolutely will. It's one of those stories that will just become part of his particular Hollywood legend. There are certain actors who are tied to their time at the Oscars. For instance, Marlon Brando, famous Oscar moment. There's the Moonlight incident. Certain performers are just tied to certain incidents in Oscar history, and this will certainly be Will Smith.
But will he be damaged by it though?
I would argue that if it were Tom Cruise, for instance, we'd still have exactly the same windfall because they're the same kind of movie stars. You've got to remember, we're talking about one of the last movie stars. There are very, very few actors on this planet whose name alone above a title can open a movie. You put a name on a poster above a title, can you sell that movie without a trailer? Now, there are very few. Tom Cruise, maybe Matt Damon, but certainly Will Smith. And you look at the legitimacy he brings to movies like The Suicide Squad and things like that, and also the fact that he is an all-round entertainer. He can do it all. He can do quite adult fare, and he's also very family-friendly in a way that sort of Schwarzenegger had pioneered at the end of the 80s into the early 90s. The idea of being an action star with, the ability to cater to families and children as well. Eddie Murphy would later capitalise on, although arguably Will Smith.
So you think he's big enough that it won't damage him, basically?
I think that's certainly the case. He's also an active producer, so there is always the stance as well that he actually, if it comes to it, can step away from the camera for an amount of time if needed.
Just quickly, I know it's terrible, but just run through some of the big highlights of the winners, because we don't want to forget about them.
Well, we've had some interesting milestones, actually, in terms of the winners. First of all, we've had our first Best Actor award go to a deaf man. We have had Troy Carter for Coda, which has also taken home its Best Adapted Screenplay award for Sean Heder. You've also got Jane Campion. I'm saying Catherine Bigelow because Catherine Bigelow was the first woman to win a director's Oscar. You've got Jane Campion becomes the first woman to win an Oscar twice as well. It's Ken Branagh's win for Best Original Screenplay for Belfast. It's been a momentous occasion as well for finally giving Hans Zimmer a win for the first time in, I think, 31 years.
An amazing composer.
And we all love a good Hans Zimmer. Yeah, we all love a bit of Hans Zimmer. And then you look at the number of his films that have actually been awards winners, like Gladiator famously won Best Picture in 2000. And also Dune. Dune was a heavy winner, technically, this year.
Well, there we go. We've got some of the names out there, even though it's been overshadowed. Van, thank you very much for coming on today.
My pleasure, Kath.
Take care. Van Connor there, film critic, host of the Offscreen podcast, mentioning some of the winners, but the big story, of course, is about Will Smith getting on stage and slapping Chris Rock.